You're listening to The People's Voice, August 1st to 31st. At the recent NATO summit in Washington, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Canada will commit 2% of its GDP to military spending by 2032. With the International Monetary Fund projecting Canada's GDP to reach approximately $4.1 trillion by that time, this commitment translates to an estimated $82 billion annually for defense. However, Liz Rowley, leader of the Communist Party of Canada, warned that the situation is even more alarming than it appears. She pointed out that Canada's official defense budget, which has already increased by over 40% over the past decade, does not fully account for total military expenditures. It doesn't include the $70 billion to buy and service 88 nuclear weapons-equipped F-35 fighter jets, the $300 billion tagged to buy and service 15 warships, the unknown billions to be spent on the planned purchase of new submarines, or the $11 billion spent on the Ukraine war. She further emphasized the growing global threat, stating, "The world is the closest it has been to nuclear annihilation in the past 60 years, and the irresponsible and warmongering announcements made in July's NATO summit have only escalated the danger." Rowley also raises concerns about the broader implications of this increased military spending, particularly the strain it places on social programs. She notes that if Canadians want progressive policies, such as improved healthcare, education, and solutions to the housing and climate crisis, the arms budget must be reduced. The only way the government can find new funds for military spending is through cuts to healthcare, education, EI, and CPP. The Communist Party of Canada is actively campaigning for a 75% reduction in military spending and advocates for Canada's withdrawal from NATO and other military alliances. The International Criminal Court has charged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant with promoting deliberate starvation in Gaza amid growing global concerns. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned the worsening humanitarian crisis, highlighting the unimaginable suffering inflicted on civilians. As Israeli military actions continue, with tanks and jets targeting civilian areas and reducing homes to rubble, a new peace initiative from Hamas has emerged. Their proposal, which includes a government in the West Bank and Gaza, led by independent figures and controlled by the Palestinian Authority, has been dismissed by Israel. Netanyahu remains resolute in his goal to eradicate Hamas, rejecting any potential for peace. The ongoing violence in Gaza is paralleled by conflicts elsewhere, particularly in Ukraine, where increasingly lethal weapons are being tested. The horrors of imperialism and mass destruction, reminiscent of the US nuclear bombings 79 years ago, now pose the real threat of another nuclear holocaust. With NATO's proxy war against Russia in its third year and tensions escalating, the risk of nuclear conflict looms large. In the Middle East, the war against Palestine could extend to Lebanon, Iran, and beyond, potentially escalating into a nuclear war. Meanwhile, the US and its allies, through organizations like AUKUS, are challenging China, raising the specter of another major conflict. The Canadian Peace Congress urges the elimination of nuclear weapons and military blocs like NATO. On Hiroshima Nagasaki Day, they call for peace, disarmament, and an end to war, advocating for Canada to adopt an independent, peaceful foreign policy. Approximately 10,000 workers at the Liquor Control Board of Ontario have ratified a new contract after a 2-week strike. The Ontario Public Service Employees Union reports that the deal includes wage, severance, and benefit improvements, along with the creation of 1,000 permanent part-time retail jobs and 60 full-time logistics positions. The agreement also guarantees no store closures and limits on the number of agency stores, countering the Ontario government's push to privatize liquor sales. Public liquor monopolies provide significant revenue for essential services like healthcare and education. Therefore, the fight against privatization is critical, not only to protect revenue streams, but also to expand public services. Public ownership can better address substance abuse issues and could serve as a model for broader social initiatives such as improving food security in remote communities. The Canadian labour movement has grappled with significant disunity in recent years. Unifor, the country's largest private sector union, left the Canadian Labour Congress in 2018, and Teamsters Canada followed in 2021. While Quebec's largest labour union, FTQ, remains affiliated with the Canadian Labour Congress, the majority of unionized workers in Quebec are not. Compounding this issue, the labour movement has historically outsourced much of its political work to parties like the NDP and Liberals, rather than maintaining independent political action. This disunity contrasts sharply with the early 1900s in British Columbia, where labour was strongly organized. Nearly 100% of skilled workers in Vancouver were unionized, and there was a wave of continuous strikes for better wages and working conditions. However, the labour movement was divided between traditional craft unions and the more radical socialist-aligned Western Federation of Miners. The latter adopted the entire program of the Socialist Party of America, reflecting a strong push towards political independence and industrial unionism. The Russian Revolution also had a profound impact on Canadian labour, especially in British Columbia, where it inspired many workers to embrace revolutionary ideals. The influence of the IWW, or Industrial Workers of the World, was notable, as they led significant labour battles across North America, including in BC. However, the IWW faced internal struggles over whether to focus on political movements or purely economic unionism, which ultimately weakened their influence. Amidst this, the One Big Union was formed in 1919 as a joint project of the BC Federation of Labour and the Alberta Federation of Labour. The One Big Union aimed to unite all workers under a revolutionary program, but it faced fierce opposition from capitalists and was eventually crushed, leaving many militants outside the mainstream labour movement. The failures of the IWW and the One Big Union highlighted a fundamental issue: the difficulty of combining a revolutionary political program with the day-to-day tasks of a trade union. This period also marked the birth of the Communist Party of Canada, which sought to unify the labour movement and advocate for both industrial unionism and broader political action. The example of the Russian Revolution demonstrated to Canadian activists the potential for workers to seize state power and build a socialist society. This realization fundamentally changed the outlook of labour activists, leading to a more strategic approach to combining political and trade union action. The principles of unity, struggle, and peace, championed by the Communist Party, remain vital in the ongoing effort to build a movement for revolutionary social change. Life on disability benefits in Canada is a struggle for survival, characterized by legislated poverty. Recipients are forced to live on just $1,300 a month, which barely covers rent, utilities, and food, leaving little for anything else, including medical expenses and transportation. This financial strain makes it difficult for many in the disabled community to participate in advocacy efforts, as even the costs of transit fare can be prohibitive. In Ontario, 70% of Ontario Disability Support Program recipients live in unaffordable private rentals, with the average market rent far exceeding the $556 monthly shelter allowance that is provided. Despite government promises to lift 1.5 million Canadians with disabilities out of poverty through the Canada Disability Benefit, the reality has been disappointing. These benefits, announced by Christina Freeland, failed to provide adequate support and uses the disability tax credit to determine eligibility, a criterion that excludes most social assistance recipients. The situation highlights misplaced government priorities. While the Canada Disability Benefit has allocated $6 billion over 4 years, the federal government has already provided over $8 billion in military aid to Ukraine, with even more allocated to military spending. The disparity reflects a government more willing to fund overseas conflict than address poverty at home. Disability advocates are calling for a change in government priorities and a reevaluation of where tax dollars are spent. They emphasize the need to stop supporting politicians and parties that fail to represent the interests of people with disabilities. The fight for adequate support against extreme poverty will continue until meaningful change is achieved, and advocates are determined to see that people with disabilities no longer have to live in such a dire condition. A better world is possible, but it requires collective action and a shift in how we think about government responsibility. That's all for now. If you're interested in strengthening working-class press here in Canada, consider lending your support to the People's Voice at pvonline.ca.